Thanks. Good morning, everyone. I have a few minutes with you this morning just to go through a brief selection of the findings from our first European logistics census. So, across 6 different audience groups and 400 senior professionals from across Europe took part in the research over the summer months. 1/4 of those responses came from occupiers of warehouses, and of those, around a third were sourced from retailers, 1/4 from logistics providers and parcel operators, and just under 40% from manufacturers. To put the research in context, we started by asking all our audience to tell us how the COVID pandemic had impacted their business in recent months. Respondents were polarised or split on their views about the impact of COVID, and that's a common theme we've seen across many of our research projects this year. Just over 1/2 of respondents said that business had increased during the pandemic, but almost 1 in 5 businesses have seen business levels fall. Across our audience segments, developers were the most positive, with 70% suggesting that business had increased during the pandemic, whilst 40% of asset managers and just 39% of occupiers shared that view. So what have logistics property professionals learned from the last 18 months? Well, there appears to be no single overriding lesson learned, but we are seeing supply chains shorten and companies holding more inventory as they seek to mitigate the risks of disruption. There is increased flexibility in the way we work, and of course, the sector has had to react to the accelerating growth of e-commerce. Putting our research into context of current trading conditions, over 60% of developers and over 1/2 of investors see current trading conditions as more favourable compared to the start of the year. Amongst occupiers, it seems that retailers are the more positive. But however, it isn't all positive news. On the flip side, we see that around 1/4 of asset managers and investors, plus 1/5 of occupiers, believe trading conditions have worsened over the last 6 months. Now, more specifically, we asked all of our respondents to identify the biggest challenges, excluding COVID, that are facing the logistics property sector at the current time. And it's clear to see that the lack of supply of new buildings is the main concern. On the right-hand side, we can see that developers and investors are aligned in their understanding. But for occupiers, perhaps understandably, there's a greater focus on costs and overcoming the 2 key operational challenges that are shaping supply chains in 2021. Focusing now on occupiers, it's pleasing to report very healthy demand prospects for warehouse space over the next 3 years. 90% of our respondents expect to require more or the same levels of warehouse space in that time, a figure even higher than the 89% recorded in our most recent UK census at the start of the year. Now, on the right-hand side, in the dark blue segments, we can see that it is the logistics providers leading this demand, with retailers and manufacturers demonstrating quite similar demand profiles. In terms of the size of facilities that will be in demand, we see that over 1/3 of occupiers are looking for the largest mega box distribution centres of more than 40,000 metres squared. And this scale of operation is particularly important for retailers. On the right-hand side, we can see that logistics providers and manufacturers have quite similar demand profiles in terms of the size of their footprints, in particular facilities, but the larger facilities are of more interest to retailers. We asked occupiers where in Europe they expect their companies to increase, decrease, or maintain their warehouse footprints in the short term. And respondents were able to select multiple countries, all of those that were relevant to their business. As we see, France, Germany, and Spain rated as the most common countries where companies are expecting to increase their operations. We next asked occupiers what features are important to them in new building design. Cost and financial terms rated as the most important factor, as they regularly do in our UK census. But having the capability to expand the size of a facility followed closely in second place. It's great to see that sustainable and green features are increasing in importance for occupiers, ranking around halfway up the list of priorities for them. Moving on now away from occupiers, the sector's positive message continued. We saw that 81% of agents and 79% of all other property professionals expect to see rising take-up across Europe in the next 12 months. In terms of investment volumes, 80% of investors and asset managers forecast rising investment volumes. And on the right-hand side, we see that of the two, investors have the more positive outlook over asset managers. We asked investors and asset managers where they are not already active, in which countries might they be likely to invest in the near term. The established, more mature logistics markets win out, with France, Germany and the Netherlands making up the top 3 new opportunities for investors and accounting for 3 of the top 4 for asset managers. But it's also encouraging to see that this sentiment aligns quite closely with occupiers' plans for growth, as we saw earlier, and highlighted here again on the right-hand side. And lastly, just to finish off today's very brief presentation, We asked investors to rank the key criteria that impact their investment selections. Building location and covenant strength are clearly the two most important factors. But aligning with the sentiment shared by occupiers, it's great to see that environmental features are ranking so highly, and in this case, just a single percentage point away from taking third place. So that completes my very brief introduction to our first EU census. There is much more analysis to discover and to publish, and hopefully we'll be doing that with Savills over the coming weeks. Thanks very much for your time.